happen to be watching this, welcome to the Mayor's Office. This is the forum for Pacifica's mayors to casually converse with regional leadership about nothing and everything, whatever the mayor's heart desires for this very brief moment. The year is 2023 as I'm taping this, so I am Mayor Tygarjas Twyrls Bigstyck, and welcome to my office. Generally speaking, I have some long-winded philosophical prologue, which I'm sure is the only reason most people tune into the show, and I hate to disappoint you on this particular occasion, but I have a very special guest with us tonight. As I usually refer to my guests, this guy is a friend of mine, and this guy is a particularly busy friend of mine, so I'm very deeply grateful he decided to make time to sit with me and converse about whatever happens to come up. I won't belabor it further, but to say thank you, State Senator Josh Becker, for joining me this evening. Welcome to the Mayor's Office.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I wanted to start with the big, high-level question that is on absolutely every Californian's mind, let alone those of the fair city of Pacifica. What's the next concert you're going to?
Next concert, I'll have to see. Well, this weekend is hardly Strictly.
Ah.
Yeah, so I want to try to go Sunday. Big Beth Orton fan, Neil Francis. It's a good lineup on Sunday. So we'll see if I make it, but that could be the next one very soon.
Very cool. I haven't been to Hardly Strictly. I went once many years ago. I've always wanted to see Emmylou Harris.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because she is a legend, even though apparently in this moment it's hard for me to remember her name.
Yes.
And I apologize to all the true music aficionados who I'm sure are screaming at their screen right now. But I was there to see Humphreys and McGee, kind of this jam band.
Uh-huh.
They happen to be playing. I'm a big fan. And I'm going to see Peter Gabriel in a couple of weeks playing Chase.
Really?
So do you not have a ticket to see Peter Gabriel?
I'm a huge Peter Gabriel. I'm probably one of the biggest Peter Gabriel fans on the planet. If you look at my Spotify playlist, it's a longer story, but there's one Genesis album called Trespass that's kind of like my power nap / meditation album. So when
you actually turned me on to Trespass.
Okay.
My girlfriend's daughter, I was building her bed, her IKEA bed, and listening to Trespass while I was building.
All right, that's good. But I get the thing on Spotify that says I'm in like the 0.001%, whatever, or that whatever converse, the 99.99 percentile of Gen. But it's mostly older Gen, the Peter Gabriel era. So I've seen Peter Gabriel many times. I did not know Peter Gabriel was coming.
Well, see if you can get yourself a ticket.
When is it?
New album called I.O. coming out. I believe it's October 11th.
Okay. Take a look. I think my first concert I took my daughter to was Peter Gabriel and Sting.
Not front to back. Oh, Rock, Paper, Scissors tour.
Okay.
That was the Peter Gabriel Sting, Rock, Paper, Scissors.
Is that what it's called? Okay, I didn't quite remember that.
That was the one at Shark Stadium, right?
Okay. Because separately, I love Rock, Paper, Scissors. I have a method, so I never lose at Rock, Paper, Scissors. I have a tech, We have to do 2 or 3.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
For my technique tour.
Maybe during credits.
Okay, all right.
So, it's important for me to shoot the proverbial wind with you in this fashion because I think it's important for the community to see what human conversation looks like between local electeds. And not that we're always kibitzing over what music we like, but, when I tell the story about building my, God willing, one day stepdaughter's bed while listening to Trespass at your suggestion, that's a real story. Mm-hmm. And that's the degree to which my friendship with you influences, what I get to enjoy learning about. And so it's important to me to present that version of our electeds because I know that before I was an elected, I would see Jerry Hill and think to myself, oh, there he is off in his ivory tower in Sacramento. Every so often he'd come and buy me a donut along with the rest of the community, and I could talk to him for 5 seconds, and that was cool. It was good to know him a little bit as a person, but not like this. Not like, I know how well you can dance.
Okay.
I am blessed to know that.
Good. It's very well, just for you at home.
It is. You're quite a good dancer.
No, but I think it's fun. It's fun. People know that. Yeah, we're human, and that's one of the biggest things I learned in Sacramento. Is it's all at a very human scale. That's why. One of the reasons I like it. There's only 40 people in the state senate, so you get to know everyone very well.
I've heard it said that upon arriving to Sacramento, it's quite common to hear that your success or failure will be determined on your capacity to build relationships while you're in Sacramento.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true in life in most cases, in most professions, not all. But yeah, certainly it's critical. I mean, ultimately, people vote for legislation because mostly, hopefully, in part on a principle, they a principled stand. But sometimes it's, they like the author, and not really like the author, they trust the author because there's so much going on. You can't be an expert in everything. So I can't, not everyone, you can't be an expert in necessarily in agriculture and climate and housing and film tax credits and, forestry in the northern part of the county. And there's just so many bills that we go to literally, hundreds, thousands actually. And so, yeah, that trust is an important part. So if you trust the author, you're often willing to say, okay, I think it sounds like good policy, but I trust this author, so I'm going to support it. Or even sometimes it's a work in progress in a committee. You say, I have some serious reservations, but I trust the author. It's early in the process. I'm going to vote to get it out of this committee to keep it moving because I know that he or she is going to keep working on it.
Have you ever introduced a bill early on, and then by the time it comes out on the other side, it passes, but it doesn't vaguely resemble what you were trying to pass to begin with?
Unfortunately, it hasn't really happened to me, but we've had people who had gotten up on the Senate floor and said, please vote against this bill because it got changed so much. There's one kind of black box part of our process, which is the appropriations process, where amendments can be, most times you have to go through and consent to amendments or not, and things succeed or not, but the appropriations is this one black box part of the process. So I've had colleagues get up and stand up and say, please vote against my bill because this is not what I intended. It's rare that happens, but it has happened. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I'm glad to hear that that's rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm certainly glad that hasn't happened to you personally.
Yeah.
What have your bills looked like this year? What have you tried to get across? Tell me about a successful bill you worked on this year.
Yeah. Well, none of them have been signed yet by the governor, so none of them are officially successful.
Which ones are sitting on the desk?
Yeah, sitting on the desk, waiting for a signature. Well, I really I work on two kinds of, I try kind of two buckets of legislation. So one bucket is really quality of life issues, here on the peninsula. So it's things like transportation, education, affordable housing, those kinds of issues. And then the second bucket is really leveraging the platform that we have, the tremendous platform, being essentially the board of directors for the state of California, to move the needle on societal issues in the state, but also things that then can oftentimes become models in other states as well. So I generally say, I work, broadly, kind of climate, economic opportunity, and social justice. And so my bill package is pretty focused in those areas. So, and I know climate's a big issue here in Pacifica, both from trying to slow, stop, and ultimately reverse climate change, and then then the day-to-day that you all deal with on the county of the reality of encroaching oceans and how we're going to handle that in the next 5 to 10 years. Anyway, climate's a big focus, and this year I had a big focus on existing buildings. So with our office, we try to take a strategic view of each issue, and with climate, you can see, 50% of emissions are from transportation, about 12% are from buildings, and we're now building most new buildings in the state, zero energy or close to that. And so the question really is existing buildings. It's about 20 megatons of CO2 from existing buildings, about 5% of our emissions, just from large buildings, 50,000 square feet or higher. And so I tackled that with what's become really the best practice across the country, what they call building performance standards, which is basically you benchmark all buildings and you say, hey, you know what a 100,000 square foot building in this part of the state, what the energy profile should be, and then you set the standards, and then you have to get there over a period of years or you face fines. And so it's estimated that this bill will create $35 billion of economic activity by 2040. Because you have to refurbish, you have to make these buildings more efficient, and they'll be ultimately better places to live and work as well. So that's an example of one piece of legislation. But I did a lot of meat and potatoes work on transmission.
Since you bring up transmission and climate for that matter, you know what, I try to kind of name these episodes something so I kind of have a theme. And what occurred to me was power from elected to local, because it's showcasing to local folks what that looks like, what the elected is doing, what they're going through, what the process is, and how by empowering you, we see what you're doing. But there was this other play on words that stemmed from, I serve on the Peninsula Clean Energy Board.
Yeah.
And we have this huge push to try and really empower people to electrify their homes. Get people off of gas. And then something happens like these, I think it was 13 atmospheric rivers this last winter, over the course of 3 months, basically straight of nothing but rain. And south of the tunnel in Montera, I serve these customers right over here at the Linamar Safeway. And so I would get customers in, they're like, yeah, I need to buy dry ice, my power's out. And then I'd see them a week later, yeah, my power's still out. And I'd see them a week later. And a lot of these folks, like at least 2 weeks, upwards of 3 weeks, south of the tunnel, they're without power. And I'm thinking, well, I want everyone to electrify. I want to bring down the greenhouse gas emissions so that maybe these 3 straight months of torrential downpour will stop at some point in the future. But because of the greenhouse gas, the climate change, the storms, now somebody doesn't have power for 3 weeks, and I want them to electrify so that we bring on the gas, so that we get rid of the storms. But how can I do that? It's like this paradox suddenly. How can I ask them to electrify their home if I can expect the grid to be so unstable that they can't rely on it for that amount of time without heat, without hot water, again, heat, but without being able to cook? I guess it all boils down to heat. Fridges that don't work, they can't cook if they had food, they can't take a hot bath. What's the solution to that? As somebody who's grappling regionally to try and say, hey, I really want you to electrify, in good conscience, I can't, because if that storm comes through and wipes you out for 2 weeks, I could see why maybe you don't want to electrify right now. What's the answer to that?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of turns of phrase boils down to all the you were hitting
can't do that if there's no electricity in here.
I know that's what you.
I don't expect you necessarily to have the answer this second, by the way. But as a regional leader, I have more
absolutely.
insight than I have right now.
Yeah, actually, a lot of my work, as I was saying, was really the meat and potatoes, and one of the issues that PG&E, our utility, has not been doing its job of fundamentally connecting things to the grid. One of the things can mean houses. People have electrified their homes that are waiting to get connected. It can just be a new hospital. The county, we've had county call me and say, hey, I'm losing $1 million a month because I can't get this new hospital connected to the grid with PG&E. Or it could be electric chargers, right? So we have this electrification of our fleet. 25% of new cars were EVs in the state, but we also have a clean truck rule, massive amount of our emissions and also pollution from trucks. So starting in January, fleets of a certain size can only buy zero-emission trucks. Well, we need all that charging infrastructure, and it takes, in this case, 6 to 12 months or longer to actually get a new charger connected to the grid. And the root causes of that are specific. I could get into, and I won't go into great detail today. But PG&E under forecasted, for this bucket, and we also need reform of the general rate case so that we don't get into this problem again. But I've been working on this for 3 years, and it finally reached a crisis point. There are about 8 bills on this in the legislature, and mine is the one that has made it through to say that we have to hold PG&E accountable. So it sets very clear standards, very clear with accountability, very clear benchmarks that they have to hit, but also takes into account the workforce development piece, so that we actually worked with the IBEW and the workforce folks, and so that's integrated in, so that we actually have enough people power to do it, and then we allowed them to do some very specific interim rate making, but with tons of guardrails and very focused just on this, clearing out this massive backlog. So that's an example of and now and the charging folks doing electric vehicles are so excited about this. I've already been in 2 webinars, and they want to take my legislation across the country now, because it's not just our region that is facing these kinds of issues. As we electrify buildings and transportation, we put more load on the grid. Then I also passed transmission legislation in 3 different parts. My legislation became part of our big central procurement bill, became part of the big infrastructure bill that the governor signed, and then I had a standalone bill on that as well. So, which is all to say that we're working on that grid resilience piece of it. The atmospheric rivers, I mean, you can't say it won't happen again. This was a pretty extreme time frame. And so...
Well, we also had that storm, I think it was October 24th, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's 3 years ago now. But it's in recent memory. And these storms, it was the one storm, really, but it packed a wallop.
Yeah.
Right? And then a couple of years later, we have this bevy of just storm after storm.
And my power was out as well. I think what we're moving forward, I know we're going into details, but it's important for people to understand. I think that's the goal, since we do have time to what's really happening behind the scenes, all the work. As I say, I'm in the trenches every day, fighting this, especially on the climate front. But the other thing that we're doing is, as people put on solar now, we're really moving to solar plus batteries. So the only person that had power, again, regardless of, all the power was out, right? So the only person that had power that I got invited to this event. I said, how are they having this event? It was actually researchers from the Technion, which is like the MIT of Israel, that were coming. I said, how are they having this event? It was because they have solar backup, battery backup, right? So now more and more, almost every new solar installation that's going in is going in with battery backup. And the biggest battery of all is in these EVs in our cars. They're about 4 or 5 times as powerful, say, as a Tesla Powerwall.
Wow. So
we're working on legislation to try to encourage that two-way communication, and it will come. There's a few models of cars that already enable it, but others it'll take time. But that's another piece, right? Even if you're down to 30% in your battery, there'll still be enough to, say, power your home for a night if you need to. So there's a number of pieces of this that we're putting in place. But yeah, I have to, if I'm going to say, I have to be able to say in good conscience to someone, hey, you should electrify, right? And feel like I'm not putting them in harm's way. But particularly the coast side, as well as, all the way down to Pescadero as well, this is a big issue. We're looking at what is the redundancy of communication, and working with Supervisor Ray Mueller has been doing an excellent job on the telecommunication side of it. But also, like, looking at microgrids. I was just last night had a little conversation around microgrids in Pescadero, and is that something we can do to build, that kind of resiliency?
We're also talking about that at the PCE level, and whether or not we have the funds to enable some form of microgrid development, or for that matter, purchase power agreements, perhaps in certain of these hotspot areas, so that maybe we can get people solar at the right rate or in the right way, if we have the resources to do work kind of like that. So you're right. It's, at my level, it feels like a lot of different pieces to a puzzle that's just starting to kind of click in together. And it feels like a lot of times with these state-level initiatives, there's kind of a timeline tacked on. And on the one hand, well, if you don't have a timeline, how are you supposed to aim for your goal, right? On the other hand, is there enough of a nimble nature to these timelines that if we get close, okay, we're doing better than when we began, maybe we should extend the timeline a little bit to get the rest of the work done to really get people there? Or is it a hard timeline, and when we hit that wall, we deal?
It depends. I mean, in certain cases, um, you do need a harder timeline. Sometimes there's flexibility. So, like with this clean truck rule, it's phasing in. That means we got to get the charging infrastructure. That's why they're so excited about my bill. We got to get this charging infrastructure in there. And other things like we put this. One of the biggest things that was, I was at Climate Week in New York. That was really the talk of the week. Was a corporate climate disclosure bill that we passed after 3 years of trying to say that corporations have to disclose their emissions, not just scope 1, scope 2, but scope 3. Scope 3 is the supply chain. So that's,
wow,
which is a big deal for a lot of these companies, which includes oil companies, includes banks for their portfolio. I mean, it's a big, big deal, and it sent real shockwaves. But what we did is we ended up saying, hey, for the first 3 years, there's not going to be penalties. So it phases in a couple years. But the first 3 years of scope 3, we're not going to have penalties. So, and you can use ranges. And so we tried to create some kind of flexibility. And then the penalties only come in subsequent years to that, right? So that we try to really give people the chance to comply. I mean, ultimately that's what you want, right? You want the result,
right,
not the punishment at the end of the day. I think oftentimes there is flexibility.
very cool. I know you've been doing some work around prisons.
Yeah.
And it's near and dear to my heart. It's a personal opinion. I'll just kind of throw on the table, do with it whatever you want. But
Yeah.
I have this personal opinion, for example, with PG&E that, well, maybe it's not the greatest idea for a public utility to be traded as a for-profit.
Yeah.
And I feel that way fairly strongly about prisons also.
Yeah.
Within the context of whatever is at any given moment. I know you've been doing work to make sure that families can connect by phone, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
And would you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing around prisons?
Yeah, sure. I was just at Hayward earlier today talking about some of this. So fortunately, we've gotten rid of for-profit prisons, and I think we've mostly, almost completely eliminated for-profit prisons in California. But there's
Thank
still,
goodness.
yeah. But there's still some very perverse things that we've had, and one is prison phone calls. And you have families in many cases who've lost their breadwinner, who's now behind bars, and then we say, hey, to keep in touch with that person, you have to pay these exorbitant fees. At a time, by the way, when telecommunications for many of us is, I mean, we can do FaceTime now, across the world, right, for free, essentially. And so the cost of telecommunications has way come down. And we pay these, make them pay these exorbitant fees. Also a incredibly cumbersome system that I won't describe at the moment. And so you have people lost touch with their families, or if they are communicating, they're a huge burden to their families, an additional massive burden, which creates all kinds of conflict. And we call it the Keep Families Connected, because we want these families, for the 99% of people are going to get out at some point. So we want them to have that social network when they get back out. All the studies show that decreases recidivism, right? Increases the odds that someone won't go back in. And so, this has been sort of a vision. And Connecticut had passed this. My friend who I went to summer camp with had talked about joining the board of this nonprofit called Worth Rises, and Bianca is the head of that, and she had been leading this across the country. So he put her in touch with me, and I said, yeah, let's do it. We're going to do it. And we worked and passed that bill. The governor signed it, which I was very appreciative of. And the number of minutes of prison phone calls has gone from 40 million minutes a month from before the bill passed to now 120 million minutes.
Wow.
So an additional 80 million minutes a month of phone calls, which works out, it's based about 15 minutes a day, per prisoner. That's 15 minutes of connection per day. And so I take great joy in that. Yeah. And now we're doing the same with the Canteen. We got 4,500 letters, same concept. Instead of saying, hey, we have a $15 billion prison system, maybe we shouldn't, make the money, make a lot of money on marking up these goods sold in prison canteens. Instead, no, they were marking them up substantially. Sometimes, a little thing of toothpaste. We just did this whole exhibit was like $1.15 at probably your Safeway. It was like $6 inside prison. I mean, that was extreme, but that was not unusual too. And we had those markups. I mean, a thing of coffee is $10.
I mean, it's like you hear something like that, and it's like, okay, somebody's in prison.
Yeah.
I would hope that our system is designed to rehabilitate them, so they decide to make better decisions on the other side, and not cause somebody more grief, and then wind up there again on the taxpayer's dime.
Yeah.
And you hear something like that, and okay, is the strategy instead to drive these people crazy so that they're more likely to commit crime when they get out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the whole, and that, again, we try to take a very holistic approach. We look at really four things: the school to prison pipeline. We look at sentencing. We looked at then conditions in prison and parole, and then ultimately reentry, right? But all four of those are sort of geared to either preventing people from going in the first place, or on the back end, making sure that they don't go in again. And so really our policy has been focused on that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So thank you for the work you're doing. And
Yeah.
I'll swing it back to the work again in a minute, but I wanted to come back to kind of a local vibe and shoot the breeze again.
Yeah.
You were at FogFest last week.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
I like FogFest. Yeah. I mean, I like, it's for me, being out of Sacramento, being the chance to just interact with people. So there's the parade itself, which is fun. I enjoy the parade and that piece of it. And you able to have some contact with people as you go along, which is fun. But then just being at the booth and just talking to lots of regular people, to me was a lot of fun. Some people didn't want to engage. A lot of people did though, and I enjoyed that. I think we had some good food, some giant pupusas.
There you go. I'm a huge fan of the oysters personally.
I know you had
barbecue
barbecued oysters. Yeah,
yeah.
I know. Maybe next time. I'm not generally an oysters guy, but maybe next time.
Once it's slathered with garlic butter, just about everything.
Yeah.
But I learned later in my life to really appreciate a good oyster.
Yeah.
And then when I found one slathered with garlic butter, which becomes an excuse to drink pure butter. I'm not gonna. After my time as mayor is done and I stop the stress eating, I'll work down the pure butter I'm slurping out of an oyster shell. But I was looking forward to that cheese stuffed pupusa, and you were kind enough to join me in that. It was delish, I thought.
Yeah. It was good.
Yeah, it's also cool to hang out with you at Ray's booth and have mayor, state senator, county supervisor, super accessible. You're busy as get out, so I appreciate that. There's only so long you can. But
it's tough to get through my security details sometimes, but I'm glad I was able to calm them down.
But you were able to hang out with the community. And that's always meant a lot to me. I was talking about Jerry earlier, coming down to Mazzetti's and doing Java with Jerry, and over time, after doing that 2 or 3 times, I do kind of feel like I'm starting to build any kind of relationship with the guy who's really making the big decisions, and you do feel more connected. And even though, maybe I didn't feel like, I can talk about your dancing. I feel very connected with you. Maybe I didn't feel like I had that level of relationship, but it still meant something.
Yeah. I think he was. Honestly, he was a model to me. He was very. He was everywhere. He really was very accessible. The Java, we kept on that tradition. The Java Jerry. Now we call it Java Josh. But I I know he worked very, very, very hard at it. Which is fun. But I do, I do. I love all my cities. We have a lot of cities, but I do like I think the Pacifica Council is. It's been really cohesive. It's a group that works very hard and is very caring, but it's also a fun group of people. So I like being around here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We like having you.
And
here.
You're by the water.
You're darn tootin'. It brings. it's nice when you can just turn to that big, beautiful body that presumably we all derived from in one fashion or another, take a deep breath, and then continue on.
Yeah.
For me, that makes a lot of difference in my life. But you've taken the time to also make sure that you are centrally located. You recently opened a new office in Menlo Park, and I think that a lot of thought was put into finding a truly central location because you have a very large district.
Yeah.
And outside of that, even perhaps when you're not traveling up here, and you do, here you are in our studio shooting a show with me, and again, thank you. Your staff is very easily accessible, and your staff is always up here. In point of fact, you thought it was a good idea to hire a member of our community to be a part of your. He's standing right over there, I think.
Yes.
Hey, Anthony. I've known that kid. I've been serving him groceries since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, as they say.
Yeah.
But to see him develop into the young man that you would hire, that then represents you and is, that's as accessible as it gets, homegrown, local.
Yeah.
And thank you for putting the real effort into giving us every opportunity to access your office.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and it's very nice of you to say.
By extension, you.
Yeah. Well, and team, I know that I can't do anything without my team, and I think that maybe is one of the advantages of having run. I did ultimately run a company, and learned some good management practices, and I wouldn't say. Some people in politics, like historically lawyers, for example, are not great managers. They didn't really have that management training, and so I did have a bit of that. And so it was a huge priority for me, to know that's all about attracting and retaining good quality people, and I'm going to only be successful if I'm able to do that. And our district team is really I'm very proud of the district team.
You have a really good team.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm close with a lot of them, and if I'm not close with them, I'm still on very happy terms with every single one of them. And when you add a new addition to your team, it's always a joy to meet them. So you're telling me a little bit about your background in management. Would love to know a little bit more about your earlier history, prior to becoming a state senator. And I don't want to pry to a place where it's uncomfortable, but would love to know, even some of your early background. If you can think of an early influence that makes sense, or college, or up to professional career prior to becoming a state senator.
Yeah. You mentioned my relationship with my mother.
That's right. We were talking ahead of time. Who hurt you, Josh?
Yes.
Who hurt you? Anthony, the tissues.
Yeah. Make sure they're ready. It's interesting, in the context of California, which is a, very much an immigrant state, a large population of immigrants. And my grandparents were immigrants to this country, so my parents were first in their families to go to college, and went to public school in Philadelphia, and so that ethos really kind of the reverence for education that they had, because my grandfather had basically like a corner deli. He worked in his brother's corner deli, and then he ultimately had his own corner deli. And my mom kind of grew up in the store, and that was sort of the background. My grandfather had literally a push cart in New York City apparently at one point. That's kind of that kind of classic background. And so, but they had a real reverence for education, and at the time, education was affordable. That's one of the issues that we face. I was with someone from Sweden yesterday saying that they actually give you a stipend in school, right? It's free, and they give you a stipend. They want you to be successful studying. And ultimately, I think we really need to reorient our whole educational loan situation. Right now, these debates about forgiveness and not forgiveness is we should move to what Australia does, which is that basically everyone gets loans, and then you pay a certain percent of your income when you graduate, right? If you graduate, you pay a certain percent of your income, right? So you're not saddled with also a massive debt even when you don't even graduate, which happens in this country.
I was blessed enough to go to Tulane University. By the time I left, it was upwards of. That's right. That's right. I was a religious studies major, and Jewish studies was certainly a large part of that. By the time I left, it was upwards of $40,000 a year to go to that school, and I had a lot of scholarship going on. I worked for my Pell Grant. I had a lot of assistance, and I was lucky to leave that school with like $37,000 in debt.
Yeah. I remember when I came out for grad school, I took out almost $40,000 just my very first year, and then I realized I better start working. So I worked, my last 3 years. Otherwise, I would have had, just a massive debt from grad school. So there's certain things about this country that just don't make sense, right? We're global outliers, and guns, of course, is one of those areas. Our healthcare system, right? The fact that we have a for-profit health insurance system that really nobody else has. There's many different models. In fact, we have a little bit of a little bit of the British model, with the VA system. We have a little bit of the Canadian model with Medicare, but mostly we have the for-profit health insurance, which
and
you talked about that. You talked about that for you.
Wildly popular, by the way. Those social programs that you mentioned.
Yeah, you talked about not making sense to have for-profit utilities, which I would actually agree with you. It really doesn't make sense to have for-profit healthcare companies, and we spend 33 cents of every dollar going back and forth on insurance claims, just wasted. Not adding any value, and that's what we had to build this year to set a $25 minimum an hour for healthcare workers, and it was very controversial because we have some hospitals that are struggling. But ultimately, when I stepped back and thought about it, I looked at the United Health. I think it's kind of one of the big HMOs, United Healthcare. I think it's United Healthcare. Their profits were like, I don't know, what I say, like something like $40 billion last year. I mean,
Holy cow!
It's a massive. I know it was $10 billion just for one quarter.
Isn't that almost like petroleum industry level profit, or like maybe a step down from, or
I don't know.
More?
I mean, it depends on the price of gas, but it's
like I expect to look at the petroleum industry and think, okay, greedy, money grubbing, destroying our planet. I expect that. Call me biased. I'm okay with that. I have a very clear anti-13 atmospheric and a row bias. Not a big fan of drought either, by the way, which are symptomatic of both. But to think of the healthcare industry.
It's health insurance specifically, right? And then also we have PBMs. The PBMs have taken on a bigger role and a bigger slice of the income. So it just doesn't make sense. We waste so much money. That's what we have. We spend twice as much per capita. Generally, countries, they spend, say, 5% of per capita on healthcare and are, not that happy, or they spend, 10% and are very happy. We spend 20% and are unhappy. So
that's crazy.
So there's just certain things that, over time, I hope to influence. Some of those are federal issues, of course, not state. But there's just certain things where we're kind of global outliers. And the other one is childcare. Childcare, and in most other industrialized countries, they spend a much higher percent of public money on childcare, where we, comes out of our pockets, and it creates all kinds of perverse incentives for having people in the workplace, and all kinds of difficulties. So there's certain of those things that are, like for-profit prisons, certain things like the prison phone calls were able to make a difference, but hope to correct some of those over time.
It feels like a distortion of what I hope capitalism was supposed to be. And I like the idea of competition. I like the idea of, okay, we're all trying to work harder to create the better product, to be able to thrive, but the consequence then would be help others to thrive. And it feels like that system is kind of warped when culturally it becomes about distributing the wealth in ways that don't make sense in terms of the human component. You know, I feel like if it were healthier, we'd be working on ways to create everybody being happier in their existence. Health is a good example. Finding ways that they wouldn't want to be a criminal, so they don't go that route. Some people might be crazy, whatever, but I feel like, generally speaking, if someone gets there, it's because they weren't nurtured in a way that would probably have been helpful to not landing them in a jail cell. When those abilities are proliferated for people to enjoy their existence, I gotta think for somebody who then makes more money than everyone else, that would make their life better on some level too.
Mm.
I've got to believe that, if there's an industry that feels like, oh, I need to get all the profit so that I can innovate. Well, how much profit do you really need, though, in order to innovate? And what part can you put back into the pool so that people can rise with you?
And the competition works very well in certain industries. It works fine. But, again, whether it's monopolistic, whether that's in a utility or, some are saying some of the big technology companies are being are they monopolies if they control search and all these sort of things? And one of my big bills, by the way, probably the biggest thing I did this year was called the Delete Act. And it nationally, and Politico has written a lot about this, all privacy, California passed 2 privacy laws by ballot measure, not through the legislature. And those have done some good. We created a data broker registry, for example. But I'm not sure people have seen the effect on a day-to-day basis yet, right? You see the cookies thing, right? Where and people, there's some value to that, but people also get tired of having to click on it. Is it effective? So when I really looked at it, on this issue of data brokers, people who have thousands of pieces of information on each one of us, right? They know who all your past roommates have been. They have your cell phone number, in some cases your social security number. They, whatever job you've ever had. I mean, they have all that information. Every place you lived, I think I said that, all your roommates. And I mean, this is stuff I found on myself that we just realized, how are we really going to address it? And I saw that there'd been a bipartisan effort in the U.S. Senate to create the Delete Act to allow people to delete that information. And so I said, it failed. So I said, why don't we do that here in California? And had massive opposition, because there's just all these businesses that are based on all the ad tech, all the data-driven businesses. And I got it through, and I'm optimistic that the governor will sign that one, and it's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah.
And thank you for.
So again, if I understand, it's a one-stop shop for people to delete their information from all data brokers.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
It's a pain enough to delete your information from one.
Oh, yeah. Really hard. And we have over 500 already registered. So if you want to go to 500 different websites and try to figure that out.
I think like Amazon is notorious for, I had a Kindle once through them, and I was trying to get rid of a thing, and, hoop after hoop of fire I had to jump through in order to try and figure out any of it.
Yeah,
So.
I just wanted to unsubscribe. I have one app I just can't figure out how to unsubscribe. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
A different problem, but yeah.
Very cool. What else were you proud of this year?
Yeah. Well,
you say that's the big one.
That's the biggest thing I did this year. I mean, that's a national. So my point about Politico is just that they wrote a story to say that since California's privacy laws, which were positive but not enough, nothing's passed in the country. Basically, everything's gotten killed. And so the fact that I got this through
that is
a national deal.
What is the number on that bill?
I believe it's 362.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone's right now immediately whipping out the
Google. Yeah, 362. So that was a fun one. My client was, I did one around protecting election workers, because they have increasing harassment of election workers, including even canvassers. And it's an important part of our process for people to be able to go door to door without harassment, people to be able to work at the polls.
One of the most heartbreaking things over the last 6 years or so, of my observation, is watching the various methods that it seems like some people along the political spectrum have been trying to implement to chip away at democracy, up to and including harassment and intimidation of poll workers,
Yeah.
members of our community who volunteer their
Exactly
time
yeah.
to make sure we have a democracy,
Yeah.
freedom of choice amongst ourselves to decide for ourselves.
Yeah. It's exactly what this bill is. Exactly what this bill is. It was something that came to us for the Secretary of State, because I'd done a previous election bill around signatures, because now we all build these mail-in ballots, and the standard used to be that for signatures, if they couldn't believe beyond a reasonable doubt that it was valid, then they would make it invalid. So there's over 100,000 ballots that were rejected in 2020. And so we said, no, we should change that, and we should increase the before you could only write a letter to the person, hey, is this your signature? So we said, hey, you can use email, you can use phone calls, and the presumption is that it's valid unless you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that it's not valid. Anyway, so I'd done that bill, and then they came to us with this bill. So that one will be on the governor's desk as well, around protecting election workers.
It's really exciting.
Yeah.
It's really exciting. So here's a slightly different question for you, but going along with your Sacramento work, you told us a little bit about your personal story, and thank you for that.
Yeah. I'm happy to tell you more, too, by the way. How much time we have?
I'm about 10 minutes. But I want to know about what it's like making relationships in Sacramento, because a big part of the reason I was excited to invite you here to have this conversation with me is so that I could give the viewers at home even the slightest taste of what relationship, friendship looks like between their local elected, their higher local elected. What's it like making those relationships in Sacramento amongst the other electeds of your ilk?
Yeah. Well, I got elected during COVID, so the usual events and none of that was happening, and I didn't really know where I was going to stay, but I would go up, since nothing happened during the week, I'd go up Monday, come back, and then I'd go up on Wednesday night for Thursday session, and there's always, when I stopped off at the Sheraton, there's always a group of people hanging out. So I said, well, why don't I just stay here? So I stayed at the Sheraton, and there's a group of people, about 10 people who stay there, mostly from Southern California, and we jokingly call it the Sheraton Caucus, just like you have other caucuses. By the way, I'm vice chair of the Bay Area Caucus and vice chair of the Jewish Caucus, so I have, and I'm really excited. I'm going to help lead the Bay Area Caucus next year, which will give me, again, a regional lens on a lot of these issues that we've touched on today. But worked with the, but anyway, so we call it the Sheraton Caucus, and it's great. It's nice at the end of the day. We have very intense, long days, usually 12-hour days minimum when we're in Sacramento, and so being able to come back and just kind of compare notes with people, and
It's a long flipping day.
Yeah. Sometimes longer, but to be able to come back at the end of the day and just kind of share war stories and let off some steam, as they say, it's helpful.
It's important. I remember it was earlier in the year at one of the Cal Cities conferences that I attended, and you were friends. I met with you after a day of whatever seminars. You actually introduced me to some of the senators, assembly. That was a treat for me to get a little peek into your social network amongst your colleagues.
Yeah.
And one of the privileges I get of enjoying my relationship with you. Very cool. I like to make sure there's a little bit of space to ask you, is there anything at the forefront of your mind that I'm not asking about that is something you really want the people to know?
I do want them to know that about the constituent service side. So half of what my job is the legislative side, and we talked a lot about that. We touched on the district team in the office, but we're here to help. So whatever issue, obviously during COVID, we spent a lot of time on EDD issues and unemployment issues. Hopefully none of us ever live through that experience again. But, other issues we can help. I was talking to two high school students who've been interns for me, and they're interested in mental health, and so give them some projects there. They're interested in the underbanked, unbanked, and underbanked, and gave them some projects there. But he was interested in those issues, so I started talking about Cal Kids, which is a program that we started in the rubric of what I call asset building. Right? How do you break generational poverty? You help people build assets, and so we started this program for everyone entering first grade. They all get money in an account, but of a certain income level, you can have up to $1,000 in an account, and then that can grow over time. And when you graduate, you can use that for education. And people, just knowing that money is there is helpful. But you have to sign up for this program, Cal Kids. So we did a town hall on that, but I don't think enough people know about it. So that's the kind of thing that our job, with the newsletter, and probably about 200,000 people that subscribe to our newsletter. And you too can subscribe. If you're not subscribed, you go to my Senate website, District 13, just search Josh Becker, District 13, California State Senate, and you can sign up for the newsletter there. We try to do that kind of information, like did you know information.
And I think they can put that information up on the screen.
Oh, great. That'd be excellent.
So
Please do. I'm working on a QA on managed lanes, because I personally get confused on the managed lanes now on 101. Like, what does this mean, and how does this cost?
Right.
And so, okay, then we can take that FAQ and get that out. But I do want to make sure people know about the constituent service piece work that we do. Hopefully we can help. We can't help all issues, obviously, but some we can.
So, like, when I need a tire change, you're not going to send someone out to...
Anthony, maybe. Pacifica, maybe.
He is close enough that he probably...
Probably could.
And like I said, I've been serving him a long time. In my case, he probably actually would. And that probably goes for a lot of Pacifica residents.
Yeah, I'm sure.
If you know Anthony Yoshida, give him a call. He'll help you change a tire. It's no problem. He gives Josh the credit. And thank you, Josh, for changing many tires in Pacifica over the course of...
Yeah.
That's very cool, and that truly is the level of your office where it is accessible to folk. And I think that I know I've referred my friends to your office on occasion.
Okay.
I'll call up Nicole or whatever and say, "Hey, Nicole, here's a thing that seems state level. What do I know about the state? You tell me." And she'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's totally us." Mm-hmm. And she'll be like, have them email so-and-so, or have them send me their email, and I'll forward it to whoever.
Yeah. We're always looking for ideas, too, for town halls, topics that people bring up. So I did the fentanyl one and got a lot of positive feedback.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
While you were doing that town hall, I think I was working that day.
Yeah.
But then after my shift, I went to an event here in the community up at Muscle Rock.
Okay.
And it was a bunch of community members getting together to memorialize their loved ones who lost their lives. And I'm still kind of trying to understand the fentanyl thing myself. After that event, I walked away, and I know from hearing about your event, I walked away with the exact same bit of knowledge I would have walked away from yours, which is that kids who are like in college, when in theory you should have a little wiggle room to be able to test the waters in some direction. Not that drugs are a great thing, and for any amount, but I would hope that there's a grace period where it's not just, oh, I tried something once out of curiosity, dead. And that's the tremendously horrific thing about fentanyl.
Right. And they're not trying fentanyl, they think they're trying something else, or even a Percocet or something they buy online. It happens to have, fentanyl. So, it was a tough one, but we got incredible feedback that people, valued the information. But we're looking to do that in other areas. We did a wildfire one, we did an insurance one, we did a water infrastructure, and so we might do one on farm worker living conditions, for example, on the coast. Working on that. But if other people have ideas, we did a youth mental health, town hall. So we're always looking for ideas. Yeah.
Thank you for looking for those ideas of what really make an impact on the community level and what information we need to know.
Yeah.
Certainly should, and again, this fentanyl thing is regionally huge. We're a stone's throw from San Francisco, where generally the spotlight hangs out. Well, that and that's the thing. I don't know the level of distribution. I know my proximity to where all the news stories are coming from, right?
Yeah.
And so to have a fellow council member like Mary Beard kind of fill
Yeah.
in some of my education, because that's the work she does. As you
Yeah,
know.
incredible work. She's great work. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. I think if we had another hour, I'd delve deeper into your childhood.
I
I'd
mean,
ask you to
I got a
list
lot to
like
tell.
every bill number
I have
that you've
some,
gone
I
through.
still have some issues I have to work through, so I wish we had more time.
We have about 2 minutes.
Mm.
What's a thing that you're looking at? You just went through the legislative season.
Yeah.
It was like running a marathon. It starts up again for you reasonably soon, I know, but I know there's a little bit of time to breathe. What's the thing you're looking forward to doing during your quasi break?
Yeah, well, a combination. I mean, first looking forward to just being able to think, have space on the calendar. We're trying to carve out space on the calendar to be for big projects, right? Big ideas, community, roundtables across my district around affordable housing. Who's actually building affordable housing? How are they actually building it? What's been successful? I'd like to do something with regional climate leaders. We have a lot of my cities that are trying different things. Okay, let's bring together. What's one thing you're doing in your city that you're really excited about that we can bring together and learn from each other? So things like that. It was my son's senior year, so looking forward to hanging out. We got a lot of football games. He's playing football at MA. I don't know if we play Half Moon Bay this year. I think the league's shifted. I have to see if we still play Half Moon Bay. And the one legislative trip, I spent many years, a lot of time volunteering in El Salvador in the early '90s. Right, had the vicious civil war that unfortunately the U.S. had funded some of the wrong people, and
How long were you down there?
For 6 months. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, in a community with no running water, no electricity, but tremendous people helping build cinder block houses, but ultimately basically starting a very basic school there. Giving out books, teaching basic literacy and math, and so I haven't been back to the country. I've been back to Guatemala where I spent time, but we're doing a legislative trip to El Salvador, so that'll be really interesting.
That's huge, and I am so deeply grateful that someone is representing me who's experienced what it's like to be in 6 months of a war-torn nation without running water.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Yeah. Thank you for being with me tonight and our crew, who I'm very grateful for Anthony, who I'm very grateful for, and that you would take the time to visit our community and just hang out and tell us what's going on. Thank you, sir, for being on the show.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Keep it up. This is great. Thank you.